Welcome back to another episode of Travel Ball Talk. I'm your host, Rich Prado, owner of Play in School. Today we're heading up to the Philadelphia area to meet with Scott Lawler, GM of Ascent Athlete. Scott, how you doing, man? Welcome to the show.
I'm good, Rich. Thanks for having me.
You got it. This has been a long time coming, so I'm glad our calendars finally matched up. Like I was saying right before we hit record, I've been following Ascent for a good little while now. I tracked you guys down over on the Twitter thing, what the kids call X these days, and might as well send some traffic over there. That Twitter is at Ascent Athlete _. And while we're at it, ascentathlete.com are the two spots where you can connect with Ascent and go track down Scott over there. So I've been, like I said, I've been tracking Ascent for a little while. You guys physically are in a building that was a baseball place that is no longer a baseball place that I was familiar with before. And I think you came on board either right during that transition or shortly thereafter. Do you want to where do we want to start? Let's start with that. How did Ascent come to be? Can you talk about that sort of foundation story from, a handful of years ago when you guys popped on the scene?
Yeah, so it started as MSI, and the fields are still there. They still run tournaments out of the Maple Zone Outdoor Field Complex. So my partner, Jeff Randazzo, was a really good high school player from Philadelphia, went to Cardinal O'Hara, was a two-sport guy, was a great basketball player, had committed to Tennessee as a left-handed pitcher, hoop player, and then ended up getting drafted, I think the fourth roundish, ended up signing right before, Tennessee started. And so he went on that journey, played for, I think, 6 or 7 years, got in a pretty bad car accident, and then got into the agent business. And in doing that, he partnered up with a guy, and they had the outdoor field complex, and there were actually 2 buildings on our current location that they owned all of that. So Jeff split probably, I want to say maybe 3-4 years ago, and they just had the buildings. The agency, Ballingy Group, came in and with Jeff and purchased that, sold off the one building, which was mostly like an indoor turf field, soccer, that type of thing, and did a full renovation on our current building, which is a 40,000 square foot. It's really beautiful indoor field, multiple cages. We have a pitching lab, a hitting area, and we have a sports performance on the second level. So it's an amazing place. So Jeff and the group did a really good job with that. And that became Ascent when they did the new, purchase, rebrand type of thing. And that's how Ascent Athlete, in the quick version, how it all came to play.
I was in that building. I was in both of those buildings several times. And I know that the building that you guys are in now was a great space. I can only imagine going in there and doing a little freshen up and, tidying that place up can only have made it better. So that's pretty cool. Interesting that you guys left the fields under the previous brand, but that's I guess a good separation to run tournaments versus the training facility.
Yeah, that was before my time. And since I came on, it's kind of evolved. So Jeff called me. I was basically in the corporate world after I got out of college coaching and did that for a long time. And Jeff had called me because I started getting more involved as my kids were coming up through it. And then he called me. He's like, hey, I need somebody to run teams. So that's kind of where it started. I came in just to kind of grow the teams a little bit, improve the quality of the teams. They weren't, it was a true training facility. And I came in and took that on, and it evolved into, hey, we need a GM. So I started doing that type of stuff. Recently, we had another partner come in and actually purchase the building. So, and I got, brought in as a partner, I'm going to say in September. So now it's myself, Jeff, and then our new partners. And So we've evolved pretty quickly, I would say, and my kind of evolution within Ascent has changed pretty rapidly. So it's exciting times.
That is interesting, and perhaps a great spot. You mentioned some of your past included some college coaching, so I think I'm curious about that. And this is a good segue to maybe talk about your personal bio. I'm looking at a couple bullet points on your bio on the website, but maybe better if you just walk us through. You don't have to go all the way back to T-ball, but maybe talk about some where you played and some of the stops along the way before you got to Ascent.
Yeah, so it's been a while, so I'm dating myself here, but yeah, I grew up in Norristown, Pennsylvania, so I'm a Northeast kid, similar to Jeff. We played in the same Catholic league. I went to Bishop Kenrick, which is now it had merged and then closed. So I was one of the Catholic schools up here. Had an interesting career, was a 3-sport guy, football, basketball, baseball. My first love was basketball all the way through. Senior year, I got really good at baseball, was Philadelphia Player of the Year, created an opportunity. This was way before travel teams. We just played Legion, had the Carpenter Cup, which was like the big all-star thing. Got kind of lucky where we played a couple games, hit a home run at the old Veteran Stadium. Jim Toman happened to be in the stands from NC State. He called me literally the next day. I just had a really good 2 games after a good senior year, and which is pretty wild because I was uncommitted up until that point, and we're talking like late May, June of senior year, which is unheard of now.
Yeah, of course.
And I had some offers to play too at like Drexel, basketball, baseball, that type of thing. I went down to NC State and just fell in love. So I went down there, played, had no idea, never really saw a college baseball game, and it was like a steep learning curve because I just became a catcher my senior year, and we didn't really have any hard throwers, so like it was eye-opening. But I could swing it a little bit, so I had some opportunities as a freshman, got hurt, ended up getting a medical red shirt, and just kind of battled through my career. And I'm trying to think, my last year, I was playing for Ray Tanner at the time, and who ended up going to South Carolina and winning a couple national championships there.
Yep.
And then, so senior year, I was made second team All ACC, had an opportunity to sign with the Astros, was hurt, had a torn bicep tendon and some elbow issues, so lasted about a year. And while I was kind of doing, rehabbing, I was back at NC State, and Coach Avon had come in my last year, who's still there.
Yep.
And asked me to help with the catchers, do some stuff with the hitters, and I just fell in love with coaching. I knew I couldn't go back to play because I had been misdiagnosed and needed another surgery. So he's like, hey, why don't you stay on, be our volley? And so I did it for a year, absolutely loved it. Our hitting coach at the time was Billy Best, who was a scout for the Braves after he left NC State and was with the Royals for a little bit with J.J. Piccolo. And so Billy was just like this wealth of information for me, and learned so much about hitting, was handling the catching stuff and just kind of working with Billy. And then he was going up to Cape Cod to be the coach at Harwich. And I had played in the Cape at Orleans right before my senior year. And Billy had to, the next summer, Elliot was like, listen, we got to recruit. So Billy didn't go back. They offered me the head job at Harwich, so I got to be there. Man, and I was probably 24 or 25, and I was the head coach in the Cape. So my development as a coach was super accelerated, and just many opportunities came my way. So did that. Elliot made me full time down at NC State. Jumped into some of the business ops for a year. Billy left to be a scout. I was doing the recruiting coordinator stuff. So I was down there for about 5 years. Which really I absolutely loved it for, a good period of time. Got to work with some really good players between NC State and the Cape, and that's kind of where it started. That's kind of my journey. of where it went. After that, yeah, I don't know how
You,
far you want me
you
to go with this.
no, that's pretty cool. Like honestly, for those of you listen at home, I knew none of that. Sometimes I know a lot about a guest, and even though I've known Scott for a little while, I didn't know any of that. So very cool. And man, you got in there right at the beginning of Avent's tenure, which is, I mean, he's had a really nice run. But something made me think about there's this sort of like opposing views or opposing strategies for learning skills, and one version, I don't know, it probably has a name, is like where you learn a thing way before you need the thing. And like, well, that's pretty cool, but like maybe you never learn that, maybe you never need that skill that you learned. And in that case, you've wasted sort of like this time, effort, brain space or whatever. And then the opposite, I do know the phrase for, it's called just-in-time learning, right? And you're like, oh, I never caught before. Well, I'm going to learn to catch now. And then you're like, well, I've never coached before. I'm going to learn to coach now. And it's like, you don't necessarily need to learn these skills before you need to implement the skill. You just learn it on the way. And it seems like, hey, I've never run a facility before. I'm just going to figure it out. I'm going to do it. I don't need to learn how to do it before I do it. You know, it's like, I've never been a recruiting coordinator. Well, let's go do it. So it seems like this just-in-time learning concept has been part of your adult life for a little while, at least from my perspective, on that story you just told me. And maybe you're embellishing a little bit, but sounds like a pretty good journey. Tell me like any story, your favorite story, something wild, something crazy, something that impressed you. I don't care. Tell me one thing about Elliot Avent.
Coach Avent was, so I had two really amazing experiences because I got to play for Coach Tanner first, who was very much disciplinarian is probably a harsh word, but he was very regimented with how he operated. And he was like that as a player. Like, he was the guy, he used to tell us all the time, like, undersized, wasn't great, just battled, didn't strike out, that type of grinder. And he coached that way. He demanded a ton out of us. I can't tell you how many times, like, as a freshman, just trying to teach life lessons about, you know, I remember we were playing and there was snow and all this stuff. We had a doubleheader against West Virginia, and there's like early BP and you show up for BP. And it's like, nobody's really out there. So I walk in the dugout with like a few guys, and he's like, you see this lineup? You were in it today. I'm a true freshman, and you're not in it now. And I'm like, why? He's like, you didn't show up for early BP. And I'm like, Coach, nobody did. He's like, it doesn't matter. And it was just that type of, you know, trying to set an example from a really young player. You know, like pregame infield, I'd be in the starting lineup. We'd roll bunts. If I didn't go hand to glove, hey, I'm taking you out of the lineup. I'm like, why? He's like, you're not doing what I'm telling you. And it's like, you got to grow up fast.
Yeah.
So I learn a lot from that, and he's just trying to teach a lesson. And I try to even tell the kids I coach now, it's like, I'm hard on you because I see a lot in you. Mm-hmm. And that's what Coach Tanner was doing. So going through that experience with him, but then Coach Avent comes in, and Coach Avent is very much a player's coach. He wants to talk to you. You'll sit in his office. He wants to know, like, details about you. He cares. I remember the first day, like, we didn't have much back then at NC State, and it was myself, Tom Sergio, who I went to high school with, who was an All-American, Chris Combs. He's like, guys, come in the office. We were the seniors coming back, and he's like, write a list of everything you guys want. And we're like, seriously? Like, can we get a TV in the locker room? He's like, sure. And it was just that way of care. And still to this day, like, Elliot and I text almost weekly. Just, he wants to know how my kids are doing, how other players who I talk to. Just a genuine, really good person, and another great mentor in a different way.
That's cool. He went, I mean, listen, he's had a really good run the last, maybe the last decade or so, with some just top tier talent down there. but he went viral a few years ago. And anybody listening who's never heard the story, I'm probably going to butcher it a little bit, so go find it. It went totally white hot around the internet. I'm sure you remember the story. You're probably texting with him that day. The story is he's out for a walk with his dog, and I guess he got bit by a rattlesnake, and he scooped that rattlesnake up, barehanded that thing, and I don't know what he did with it. I don't know if he wrapped it up in his jacket. I don't have any idea what he did, but the guy, just the cojones on him to just like barehand that sucker, and he took it in with him to the hospital. I guess he figured, hey, we got the offender right here. You know, like I don't know anything about snake bites. Like, do they need the venom to make the anti-venom? I don't know. And I'm assuming he didn't know either, which is why he went for it, which is one of the craziest stories ever. But that was probably, I don't know when that was, maybe 8-10 years ago already. But that was a wild story about him just out minding his own business. Next thing he knows, he's going toe to toe with a predator rattlesnake. Well, that's cool, man. What do you figure he was? You play for Tanner and Avent. They were both younger guys at that moment in time. That was the mid '90s when you were playing for them. They're not the long in the tooth, gray haired guys that we were familiar with. How old do you think Avent was when he was the guy asking you to come in to give you the list? Do you think that was part of like his approach? Was he was, the younger, on the younger side for ACC coaching?
Definitely. So he came in '97, and I want to say he was probably like 42-ish at that time.
Oh, okay. It wasn't as young as I thought he might have been. Okay.
No, he was probably right around there, 40, 42. He had an interesting run, wasn't a great player, and went out. He was coaching at a few different, like Lewisburg Junior College, and went out to New Mexico State, had a really good run out there. He kind of made his bones, and then got the job at NC State. And I had never heard of the guy. It was pretty interesting. I was up in the Cape, and we didn't have a coach all summer, and my teammate was the other catcher at Orleans was Josh Holliday, who's the head coach at Oklahoma State. And, he's asking me what's going on. And Josh and I used to go work out together and all the stuff that you do during the day, pregame stuff. And I was like, there's this guy, Elliot Avent. And he's like, oh, my God, you're going to love that guy. And I'm like, how do you know Elliot Avent? Like, my dad is, like, great friends with Elliot. And I'm like, okay. And Josh is such a good guy, and I believe him, and he was right on. So, like, Elliot he's just the best. So, still is.
So fast forward a little bit, you realize college coaching is an incredible grind, long hours for short pay. Something leads you into the corporate world. We can either touch on that or we can skip ahead. But eventually you left the corporate world and got recruited back into the baseball world. Do you want to connect those dots in any way you want?
Yeah, no problem. I was coaching, like I said, at NC State. Was having a blast. I'm an only child from Norristown. My parents got sick. My dad had open heart, that type of thing. My mom had some health issues, and it was just like, felt like I needed to be closer to home, and moved back. And they're fine. They're still a very big part of my life today. So it all worked out. And so the move was great, but I kind of moved home, and I had this kind of moment of all I've been doing is baseball, and wanted to kind of figure out, like, hey, what could I do to kind of, I don't know, stimulate my brain in a way and also make some money. So I started looking around at different jobs. I had been recruiting, so I was looking at sales stuff, and that's when I had some friends in, like, the pharmaceutical world. So I kind of dove into that, had a run in different progressions of pharmaceutical sales to biologics. I went into orphan disease stuff and did a lot of plasma supply things for the big hospital systems like UPenn and Jefferson and all the stuff in Philadelphia. And yeah, just had this progression of like, I don't know, probably 17 years or so of different roles and disease states within that. And it just got to the point where as my kids got older and I'm watching travel and had this itch because I was working with them and some of their friends and just being on the field more. And I'm like, man, I really miss this. And just kind of ironically, Jeff kind of heard about it. I called Ascent one day to rent some space for a team, and Jeff picked up the phone and was like, what are you doing? And I was like, this is what I'm doing. And he's like, hey, I got an opportunity. What do you think? And I was like, it took me a while. I told him no for probably 2 or 3 months, and then decided like, yeah, I think the time is right. So I jumped right in.
That's cool. And how old are your kids now? Are they running around doing travel ball?
They are. So I have one who's a 2027 and one who's a 2028. So they play, yeah, for us.
Holy cow. There might be some folks who are on the West Coast or down in the Southeast or maybe out in the middle of the country who might not be savvy to the fact that Philadelphia has some incredible athletes and tremendous baseball. Can you just sort of highlight the competitiveness of your area for a second?
Yeah, I think that, growing up, I know this area really well. When I was a recruiting coordinator, like I would recruit this area. I feel like the fast pace of the Northeast, and we are so like entrenched in different sports, like hoops is big in Philly and football in the high school, like all this stuff is really big, but it's just producing like really, really good athletes. And I was looking at it the other day, like states that produce the most pros, and you would think like California and Florida and Texas and Pennsylvania is right up there. And it's one of these areas that, just gets really, really good talent. And I've always known that. And it's still happening to this day. There's just really good players like, you pick a Mike Trout that comes out of South Jersey, which is kind of, right over the bridge from us. And he's one of the greatest players in the game. And he grew up down the street. So yeah. It's just a really cool area.
It is funny how that you Philly guys claim that Cherry Hill area to be your own sometimes, don't you? That is funny.
It might be vice versa. Because we have all the Philly sports. Everybody wants to be an Eagles fan, a Phillies fan, a Sixers fan, Flyers fan. So
yeah, 100%. Yeah. If you're growing up in Cherry Hill, you're a Philly. You're going to be a Philly Eagle guy. You're not going to be a Mets Jets guy. That's hilarious. Yeah, even I listen. For a long time, I kind of was riding up and down 95, working in Philadelphia a lot with teams in there, like. Every team was like just super competitive. Always got to give a shout out to Dave Amaro, one of the best dudes out there with the Philly Bandits. He always has dudes, always. And you could say the same. There's, listen, I don't really on this show to get too caught up in specific players, but right down the road from you, there's this. It doesn't matter who they are, but I think one brother went first round, the other brother went second round or fourth round. It was fourth round and second round or something like that. One's already in the big leagues. It's like little schools in Philadelphia pumping out dudes, pumping out absolute dudes. And you can turn on the TV and watch a big league game, and there's bound to be a guy on the field from the Philadelphia area. And it's pretty impressive for what you would consider. It's not New England, but it is north. It is a little bit colder. It is definitely not Atlanta. There's a growing number of really good events going on up there, with some of them happening right there at Jaws Fields at the MSI turf fields. So that's pretty good. Let's talk travel ball, because this thing's called Travel Ball Talk, so we might as well, actually hold true to the name of the podcast. How many teams y'all running on the baseball side these days?
So right now we have 21 on the baseball side and 5 on the softball side.
How young to? I'm assuming you go up through high school, or is there a college league that you guys sort of field a team in?
We don't do the college, so we start at 9U and we go up to our 2026 class this year. Got it.
And you mentioned softball. You got a handful of softball teams. I'm guessing. It's so funny, and I kind of want to pull on this string a little bit. It's been brought up on this podcast many, many times. It's surprising to me that more organizations like y'all's don't they don't have a second sport or even a third sport or fourth sport. But the ones that have softball, it always, not always, but very often seems to be somebody in leadership or one of the baseball coaches has a daughter and they spin up their first team. So y'all have 5 teams. What are the chances that, whether it's Jeff, your partner, or one of the coaches over on the baseball side had a daughter and y'all formed the first team around that kid?
Surprisingly, we don't. It's just kind of evolved into it because I don't want to say low-hanging fruit. It's just an opportunity because we are a really big training facility to get into that market. So it's an easy lane for us to be in. And we started it last year and it's gone really well so far. And yeah, we're going to build that out as we move along.
What are talk to me, because there's some baseball coach who's running the facility who's listening to this right now who's maybe sort of on the verge, right? Maybe he's got an opportunity. What are some of the things that surprised you, and what are some of the things that that didn't surprise you about launching softball?
It operates a little bit differently. Like their seasons, generally the teams run on a year basis. I know baseball teams, some of them do that as well. Usually the baseball teams operate like spring, summer season, and then there's a fall season, so it's separate. So you're running multiple tryouts a year type of thing. Softball is a little bit different in that way. I could go down into like the uniforms and the personalization of gear, and they want bags. They like to look very uniform and all that. And so there's a really good blend of bringing some of the softball, I don't know if the word is trends, but kind of customs that they do, bringing it to the baseball side and vice versa. So it's been a really good marriage and bringing them on. So it's really cool. Yeah, the girls coming in the building, it's amazing to watch because they're always like ready to go. Jerseys are in, pants are like, it's just, they're just excited to be there and they're bouncing around and dancing. And it's, the guys roll in and like shirts untucked and stuff like that. And we're fixing everything before practice starts as we're doing our dynamic stretching. So I love it.
It really is it's like a totally different culture, isn't it, between baseball versus softball?
Yeah, it is. But there's so much overlap, you know what I mean? So it's like, we're just going to continue to evolve with both. So it's good.
Have you had any of your two questions, same question, but at different levels? Do you ever have any overlap in the training, putting boys and girls together? And have you had any of your coaches overlap? Softball come to coach any of your baseball guys go coach any of your softball girls. So any sort of commingling of the two different sports?
Yeah. So our big flagship, the way we train is a little bit different. Like we do our one-on-one lessons and camps and clinics, things like that. But our player development, we call it PDP, is really our flagship. So it gives the kids, softball player or baseball player, they come in, they have to do a full evaluation. It takes a couple hours. They're with each department, meaning hitting, throwing, and then sports performance. And we do all the movement screens. We get them on the force plates. We do all the testing. Same thing over in the hitting area. We get them on hit tracks. We get them on with the blast sensors. The throwing's done with mechanics and velo. We do the videos. So that's like the beginning of a player's training journey. Once that ends, we build out their programming. And they have the ability to come in 6 days a week, and they go through each department. So, yeah, like I just bought a new softball, machine, and it's over in hit tracks, and there's another baseball machine behind it, and whoever's in there, just, you just swap the machine type of thing. Same thing with the throwing. We're doing all the same testing, making the mechanical adjustments. And, yeah, so our hitting coaches are coaching our softball players, our throwing coaches, our pitching coaches. We call them throwing just because we train, arm velocity and health and care and all that stuff. Whether it's a pitcher or a position player. And then sports performance, we're doing all that upstairs.
That's cool. Yeah, that is cool. There's really hasn't been many of my guests that have that kind of overlap. A recent podcast featured. Actually, it was an organization that started with softball and then added baseball later. That was with Brett Swip of Extreme Pride up in the Chicago area. But rare circumstance. Now, let me ask you. So you now have experience adding one additional sport. Would you consider, if you had the right coach or GM or maybe an entire organization comes to you, would you add a third sport to the Ascent brand? And what would it be if you had to make that choice?
So Jeff was very strategic with naming us Ascent Athlete because it is athlete. And right now, like, we have the ability to, in our sports performance area, we have had professional basketball players train with us. We've had, believe this, like a cricket player. We've had ice skaters. We've had all of this in our building. We just got a high school girl. She's a professional beach volleyball player. And she walked in the door about a month ago, and she's like, tell me about your training. And we do the eval for her. And she's just committed to Southern Cal for beach volleyball. So I see her every day almost at 11:30, 12 o'clock because she goes homeschool. And
oh, cool.
So we have the ability to do all that. As far as like teams on that side, haven't like broached that subject yet just because, we are big and we are growing and there's so much more we can do on the training and the team side. It's like, let's stay in our lanes a little bit for now.
Yeah, totally.
And if an opportunity presents itself, like, we just want to make sure we're carefully growing to where it's done right. And we're just not like just trying to throw stuff against the wall and see what sticks.
Mm-hmm. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But
yeah, right.
So wait, that's so wild. She's the high school girl is a current professional beach volleyball player in high school. That's wild.
Yeah,
she must
she goes
be.
Well, she's homeschooled, but she's like part of Garnet Valley, which is right near our building. And she travels all over.
That's
the place
awesome.
For beach volleyball. Yep.
That is wild, man. The total world I'm totally clueless about. That's very cool. I want to ask a few of my standard sort of normal questions before I lose you, because I don't want to keep you too long today. But I always like getting at least a couple of these because they usually give me something to think about. The first one is usually a layup, but man, sometimes I get some great answers. Is there a book, a movie, a website, a Twitter page, anything where you're gaining information that you like to share with your players, the other coaches, or the parents? Could be any resource. I mean, but it could be a book, could be a movie, whatever it is. A website, I don't care.
Oof, that is a good question. So book-wise, I used to be a big reader, and now I'm more of a audiobook just because I have so much drive time in my car to my house and the facility.
Yeah.
I would say, one that was pretty impactful back in the day was like Outliers with Malcolm Gladwell and, understanding what was going on there. And I still think it holds true because running travel teams or training kids, like knowing ages of kids in development and opportunities that present is a big thing. And he goes into a lot of detail about, hockey players and that type of thing in the book. So I like that one a lot because it still holds true with what we do. I do a lot of podcast stuff where I'm listening to that, just trying to find really good like coaches or people that run orgs or buildings, or it could be business related. Like right now I'm kind of doing a lot with like even some of the stuff with like ABCA.
Mm-hmm.
So I listen to some of that stuff because, Brownlee has some good guests on, like college coaches trying to pick for, especially in this crazy world of what's going on with college baseball and rosters and scholarships and NIL.
Besides that one, is there any specific one that you've listened to, one that you like besides Joe Rogan? I'm just making that. I don't know if you like Joe Rogan, but he is the most popular one ever. But is there anybody that comes to mind?
I do listen to some Rogan. I just started on this one called Baseball Forward, which is this guy, what's his name? Jim Swanky. So he coached at LSU and Oklahoma State, and so he's had some guests. I just listened to one on, like, he had Tom Holliday on. He's had Gary Ward, who's on, like, the Mount Rushmore of college coaches from his days back at Oklahoma State, just trying to gain knowledge. But yeah, I always like
this is great. I just pulled it up. This is great. This reminds me, my old friend Jack Warren used to run the Top Coach podcast, and he was featuring college baseball coaches every single week forever. I tell you what, all of those, that's all evergreen content. If you should go and find Top Coach podcast. But this Baseball Forward is featuring tons and tons of college coaches. This is really good. Very good. I'm glad I asked this question and pushed you a little bit on this one. Oh, is there anything else in this sort of category of sort of knowledge and sharing information with your guys that is worth sharing?
No, I mean, some of the mental stuff. I'm trying to think. AJ Brown was just on one of the playoff games reading a book called Inner Excellence. So I downloaded that. So I like audiobooks. I try to get some of that. Baseball's such a hard game mentally. It's how do we coach better on that side to make a kid feel good and be more confident. And so I'm cognizant of what goes on in that space. So I'm trying to always educate myself better there. And then there's some business stuff that I'm looking at just on the back end of how we operate. That
book went to number 1 the day after that game. By the way, that was hilarious.
Yeah.
For those of you listening, it was it during the was it the Super Bowl or was it the league championships?
I think it was a playoff. Yeah, I think it was that one.
And he's sitting on the sideline reading a book, and everybody's like, "What is this guy doing? Who reads a book on the sidelines?" And sure enough, everybody zoomed in and went and bought the book. What was it? Tell me the title of that book one more time.
Inner Excellence. Inner
Excellence.
Yep.
All right. Last question. This question can open up some. It can go a million different directions. But what is one change that you think could be made to travel baseball that would have the biggest positive impact?
Oof. So I spend a lot of time thinking about that, and there's like things that pop up while you're down at East Cobb or Lake Point or you're in Florida, Jupiter. It's like, man, I wish this was different. And it's like every time I think of something, I see the positive on the other side. So it's, perfect game or prep baseball, which is formerly PBR. It's like the amount of teams or the quality of teams. And when you go down and it's 300 teams and it's like, but those guys do so much good
yes,
for the kids and the
sure.
exposure. it's so hard to run everything the way they do and it be perfect. And I think they're always trying to change. So it's like maybe like a roster limit on how many kids, because, we roll down with maybe 13, 14, 15 kids to a tournament, and you look in the other dugout and there's 25 or 30 and guys are flying in.
Yep.
Arms in the playoffs, and it's like, man. So maybe that would be something I hadn't thought of.
But if they're going to make you play 5 games for the championship in the last 24 hours, you kind of need that many dudes, But they really care about those arms. You know what I'm saying? The 5 games in a 24 to 36 hour span to win a championship. That would be one thing I might want to adjust.
100%. I think more than two games in a day is crazy.
Yeah,
it's crazy, and it's not realistic or healthy. But I do like. But I'm saying that I like when PG at least has some semblance of pitch count. So it's like, you know what I mean. So you need the horses to go do that.
Course.
But I think there's a blend in there of something.
It's obviously, I think, easy to nitpick stuff, and is amateur baseball better off because PG and PBR exist? Absolutely, they've probably done more for this industry than anybody. But yeah, you go down to Atlanta and there's 300 or 400 teams in the same tournament, and you get a team full of ACC dudes matched up against a team, from the school of the deaf and blind, and you just know those aren't balanced games, and it just feels like the easiest thing for them to do would take those 300 or 400 teams and put them in 3 or 4 sections, right? Like and create more balance. But it would be hard. Like if you're down there with the school of deaf and blind, and they tell you you're in the D division, maybe you don't want to go down there. You know what I mean? Right. So that could be have some kind of negative consequence for for the people who are counting the money at the back end of the event. That's one.
I agree with you, and I think it's really hard. I mean, I think that would be a good thing. But the same way, like, these kids change teams so much, and it's like, how do you determine who really is great?
Yeah.
Because if you're a new team and you're in an area, like, I have kids on my team that started like shortstop as a freshman, and they're not ranked in our state because they've never gone to a PG event. So if I tell somebody at PG, like, hey, my roster's really good, and they're like, well, you don't have enough ranked players, then it's like, are we in the C and D division then? Yeah. I want to go play the top teams in the country.
Of course. No, it would be hard. Like, I'm not saying that would be easy.
Yeah.
It would there would definitely be some difficulty to it. And again, perhaps a little bit of blowback where all of a sudden they don't put you in the division that you think you want to be in, and you decide not to go because there's another event that you can go to that's gonna do whatever. So, anywho, that's a challenging question. Is there anything, now we've been talking about it for 5 minutes. Is there anything else that has popped into your mind that you think could have a positive impact?
Not really. For me, it's always like just trying to get as many eyes from a college standpoint on our kids. Like when we go south, like I tried to build our schedules, like our 27 group will go to Georgia a couple times and go to North Carolina, go to UVA, like just making sure that we're going. And there's nothing anybody I feel like can do. Because the college coaches go to they go to East Cobb or Lake Point. Lake Point's a little bit easier because there's so many fields in one place. But it's just, it's just work on our end to make sure that the schools that our kids are interested in or the school is interested in our kids, that we're communicating with them. I'm not sure there's an easy way to do it, but
Yeah,
that's our job, and that's what we handle.
it requires, and you were on the other side of it, however many years ago now. I mean, it requires communication skills. It still requires, maybe instead of picking up the phone, you're sending a text, but it requires relationships, and a lot of the youngsters out there, I think these days, man, they think you just throw a video on Twitter and you're done. Like, yeah, that's a good start, but I think there's a little more than that. And your past experience probably makes you pretty good at it. Well, listen, I'll let you. Do you have any sort of parting words for any parents or coaches or players that still might be listening?
Not really, man. I still think this, a lot about being an athlete, especially in baseball, is just patience and perseverance. Perseverance goes a long way with, because there's so much failure in the game, and keep showing up the next day, keep working, and usually a lot of times the game will reward you for that perseverance. So just try to tell our kids, like, if it's a bad day, hey, we're back at it tomorrow, and let's learn from whatever didn't go well today. So, yeah.
Tremendous. I mean, it really is. It's like, just be the last man standing. Just keep coming back, because this game is hard. Again, you guys can, if you're listening, ascentathlete.com. Over on X, it's at AscentAthlete_. Go find Scott somewhere over there. And that's a good place to kind of check out the facility. Since they did that reno in there, the place looks awesome. They got that sort of like black on black look, which is really popular right now. Love that. Scott, thank you for your time. Don't hang up. I'm going to end the recording, but hang on one more second.
Thanks, Rich.